All right, we can go ahead and get started. Morning or good afternoon, wherever you are watching from. My name is Dylan Hoffpower, and I am an admissions counselor at the Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. I am actually really excited for this presentation with Dr. Stephen Murphy. I worked on a webinar with you pre-COVID with you and Sue, and we went to the Office of Homeland Security in downtown New Orleans, and you gave a really cool webinar then. So I'm excited to see your presentation today. Dr. Murphy is an assistant professor and program director for disaster management at Tulane. So I'm very excited to have you guys all see his presentation today. So you can take over.
Great, thanks Dylan. Thanks for the introduction. That was a fun project. I want to ask you real quick, I've tinkered with my lighting. Is that still coming in as kind of two-faced here?
I can definitely see you. Your right side of your face looks a little dark, but I definitely can see you.
Should I try to change the lighting, or are we good enough to go?
I think we're good to go.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So welcome everybody. I see a lot of familiar names and faces here. So for those of you that I do not know yet, I look forward to, I guess, sharing my path here. I was asked to join this Public Health Week presentation series, webinar series, to kind of give you guys or introduce my career path to Tulane, as well as what I do here and why maybe I feel like it's important. Maybe you guys do too. But as Dylan shared, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Environmental Health Sciences. Really, environmental health sciences, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, it's really a foundational piece of what you might consider to be exposure science. It's looking at how you are exposed, the modality with which you come in contact, or through which you come in contact with something, whether that's a contaminant, like we see in air, water, soil, things like that, which are more traditional in the environmental health sciences, or a disaster. We see a disaster come in contact with us all the time. We're experiencing one right now with the pandemic of COVID-19 and the virus causing it, of SARS-CoV-2. How we transmit that virus is through the environmental media of air, through respiratory droplets and aerosols, bioaerosols. And so it's the disaster management program is kind of housed in the environmental health sciences department because of that reason. And we kind of cross-pollinate the disaster space with some of the other traditional disciplines found in the environmental health sciences space to kind of round out the disaster management curriculum and what we do for the students there. So I came to Tulane through a long path, I guess, and I originally did not come here anticipating to do what I am doing today. And so bear with me as we kind of take this little bit of a journey back in time a little bit and kind of showing you how it might have shaped my career. So I wanted to put this slide up here just for those of you that are unfamiliar with the program and maybe want to know a little bit more about me. These are the links directly to our homepage and directly to my faculty page. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction into who I am, some of the courses I teach, and some of the advising pieces there. As you can see, I do advise Masters of Public Health students, as well as some of the joint MD, MPH students who are here to get their training in medicine before their residencies. And then they want to double dip into the public health spectrum, which many find to more position them in a well-rounded position, I guess, going forward upon graduation. And several of them choose the Environmental Health Sciences Disaster Management program to do that. And so my career really took a shift in 2001. That was really the defining moment that shaped my career. And if you guys remember, we had the World Trade Center and several other aircraft that impacted several other areas of our country, and the anthrax mailings. And so that is where my attention kind of shifted into the medical, clinical kind of public health, eventually public health space. And so I was in a different career, completely different than what I am today, and completely different from what this incident and this threat posed to us as a country and to anybody in the globe and to our general population as well. And so when I kind of went through that, while I was not in DC or New York, it still impacted me. And it really made me want to know a little bit more about how I might be able to be on the front line of that, should it ever happen again. Zeroing in explicitly on those biological threats. And so I started exploring different programs to help me get there. And as you will soon learn, I'm a planner. I'm an analytical person that really likes to think ahead of the game a little bit and leverage anything I can to make sure that I might land on my feet. And so regardless of what I go through. And so I started to double dip in my, I guess, my academics, if you will, to help get me to a potential landing spot to contribute to this space, whether that was the public health or the clinical and medical side of things, getting back to the anthrax mailings. And so in doing so, I started to do a two-pronged approach. I was in the financial world, and so I was going to pursue my MBA to ensure that should whatever I try to go into from the public health side or the medical side not come to fruition, not come to reality and play out the way I really wanted it to. And so I started getting my MBA as well. And while I was doing that, I encountered medical, or should I say a healthcare managerial epidemiology course. And so that kind of raised a few eyebrows in over time throughout that class for me. And I started to kind of think, well, wait a minute, maybe public health is a better fit for me to go through. And so I started really shifting my attention more towards the public health space instead of the clinical or the medical side. And so upon completion of my MBA, which I was doing in a two-pronged approach, again, getting back to that word two-pronged, in corporate finance, should something fail, I would continue my trajectory in something that was familiar to me and make sure that potential resume landing spots, they would not see an abrupt shift in my trajectory. So I pursued that and got a dual emphasis there. But healthcare management really threw me into the epidemiology world and ultimately the public health space. And so at that point, I started exploring how I could position myself in programs that would allow me to contribute to this field. And Tulane was one of them. Tulane, I applied to Tulane and really explored how I could get in this field. And epidemiology was obviously a position, an entry point for me, as was just general public health. And so I came to Tulane School of Public Health in 2005, right about 5 weeks before Hurricane Katrina hit. And so I immediately felt the impacts of that. And it kind of cemented and kind of confirmed my decision on exploring public health. In the aftermath of that, I kept, I would experience various things. And as I was evacuated in Baltimore, attending Johns Hopkins during that time, it really made me explore beyond just what initially sent me to Tulane, if you will, with the anthrax mailings and the occurrences or the incidents that happened on 9/11. And so I started to learn a little bit more about how public health preparedness itself was shaped and what it truly was. And so I came back to Tulane in New Orleans as pretty much as soon as we could. And at that point, the Department of Environmental Health Sciences, then entitled Global Environmental Health Sciences, had just launched a disaster management program. And it was really on the heels of Katrina and the Public Health or the Pandemic and All Hazards Preparedness Act from the public health side of policy there, with the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response being established under HHS. And so it was a perfect fit for me. And I immediately got involved in that program with the founder and creator of that program, Dr. Maureen Lichtfield, who's now at Pitt. But she made this program and I joined it and graduated with my MPH. And so as I was doing that, I part of the program and then and now, especially now, was to get practice-based experiential learning. And so as I was doing my curriculum and going through my coursework, I explored ways to get involved in the field to satisfy both the requirements of the program in the school, but also my thirst for just wanting to get into it. And I explored the local outlets and the state outlets here just for sheer convenience factors in New Orleans. And so when I did, I encountered the newly established New Orleans Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, which post-Katrina became the belly button, the point office and agency responsible for all preparedness activities across the city, whether it was from a hurricane, from an infectious disease outbreak or a pandemic, from a tornadic event, from a complex coordinated type terrorist attack, from a event planning perspective with Mardi Gras and all the open air festivals that we love and enjoy here in New Orleans. It makes New Orleans what it is, helping protect in advance of those. And so that office opened its doors to me. I became really close colleagues and friends with the director of that office, who moved on to Atlanta, Georgia now. He was a classmate of mine, and in the same program I was in. And so that's where my experiential learning kind of met the real world. And so immediately upon graduation there, they offered me a full-time position after being an intern on a repeated basis through my academic career. And so through various years, several years there, I ended up going to become the director of planning and preparedness for the office, and had some day-to-day managerial kind of positions, looking at grant management and things like that from the non-competitive grants that come through public health preparedness programs, as well as emergency management and homeland security type enterprises. And so at that point, that office was still the point person or the point agency for public health preparedness. In today's environment, New Orleans Health Department is really taking the reins of that, and rightfully so. But we were heavily responsible for it on the heels of Katrina and coming out of Katrina. And so I was kind of straddling that fence, or really the three fences of public health preparedness, emergency management, and homeland security, all under that same office, and some of the authority and responsibilities that we had underneath it. And so it allowed me to really explore the gamut there of really health security, from how we protect the population against any and all of these potential threats, and the mechanisms that go on, and some of the initiatives and grant funding initiatives and scope of responsibilities there. And so as I was doing that, I ended up really remaining in contact with Tulane for a litany of reasons. And we see that even actually happening today with various local jurisdictions and state jurisdictions leveraging their academic partners for science expertise, public health and science and medical expertise, research expertise in the pandemic response, and learning more about what this pandemic is doing, And so I also was constantly in touch with Tulane in the department here in environmental health sciences. And so I quickly learned that I wanted to continue my education, and finding time to do so was challenging. I was in the middle of getting married and maybe starting a family, which we have now, thankfully. We've been blessed with that. But it was tough. It was hard for me to find the time to do that while I wanted to continue working, because the field was my laboratory. I was getting, and anyone on this call that gets in this field or has been in this field will appreciate this, is that you can never underestimate or overstate how important that experience is while working. You just get immersed into so many different avenues of what this disaster space really is. So I was able to finally find the time to dedicate to my studies and finished my PhD here in the department. And at that point, I was offered a position and to help become part of the core faculty here in the disaster management program, which eventually led to the program director responsibilities. And we continuously shape the curriculum to kind of better position our graduates upon graduation, obviously, and even while they're going through the curriculum, so that when they do get an internship and or a job career later, they hit the ground running, and at least they're walking if they're not running. I don't want them to trip. And so we really remain on the flip side of that outreach. I at Tulane always go back to my previous places of my contacts, whether it's at the New Orleans Homeland Security Office, whether it's in Atlanta, Georgia, or Washington, D.C., or Arlington, Virginia, University Medical Center, and hospital coalitions across the U.S. to help marry up our curriculum with the expectations that our students might experience upon graduation. And so that's kind of how I got where I am. I know that was kind of quick, but that's really who I am, where I came from. I should tell you, my undergraduate degree was in economics from the University of Georgia, and my MBA came from Mercer University in Atlanta, and then my master's here and my PhD at Tulane School of Public Health. So that's kind of my academic in a nutshell, but also how I got to where I am. And so all of these pictures here, you can see the letter from 9/11 that really threw me into this field. I got heavily involved in this space, which is a really crude picture of the Strategic National Stockpile. And so a lot of my work between my two Tulane degrees was focused on medical countermeasure distribution and strategies that help send these countermeasures upon need to the population at risk, or the population being impacted. And so I learned a lot in the field, and had the unique ability to kind of lean on academics as well as the field experiences to help shape my career, and hopefully help shape some of the policy that we still see in New Orleans today. And obviously this was the picture of Hurricane Katrina, and we've seen how hurricanes continue to plague the globe, really, but really the Gulf of Mexico. And as climate change continues to alter our climate dynamics, and we'll start to see probably a more northern push up the U.S. seaboard, Atlantic seaboard there. But regardless, that's kind of where I am. My research and my interests, kind of want to touch on a little bit of those. Obviously, my training, my interest in training the Emergency Support Function 8 workforce, and even beyond just that. And I want to take a moment to describe, for those of you that are unaware of what Emergency Support Function 8 is. On the heels of 9/11, a lot of policy and a lot of even departments were created. The Department of Homeland Security did not exist prior to 9/11. And so they are the umbrella mechanism for FEMA and a lot of other, even public health focused departments, including what is known today as the Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction, which used to be a smaller office of the Office of Health Affairs. That falls under DHS too. But Emergency Support Function 8 and a lot of the 15 emergency support functions that we know today were born out of 9/11, were born out of the policies that were created post 9/11, and really became a staple of what is now known as the National Preparedness Goal, which was really shaped by Homeland Security Presidential Directives 5 and 8, under the Bush administration, and then really put on steroids during the Obama administration, and launched what we now see as the National Preparedness Goal. And within that is the National Response Framework, which was initially put into play as the National Response Plan, went through various iterations. But in that, it really focused on one aspect, really focused on stakeholder engagement and kind of reaching out in the jurisdictions, whether you're at the federal level, the state level, or the local level, to really tap into your local assets or your jurisdictional assets, if you will, to help you understand where you might have some gaps. And so the emergency support function 8 structure, or the emergency support functions structures, go from 1 down to 15 standardized. And number 1, for example, is transportation. So anything you might need transportation wise in a crisis in your jurisdiction should be helped. You should help, ESF1 would help you kind of coordinate that. It would help you identify that. It would help you partner with them. It just calls attention to very like mission responsibilities as you go forth in a disaster. Emergency support function 8, as you see on the screen, is public health and medical services. So pardon that very quick introduction to what ESF8 is, but that's really where we, those of us that are probably on this call, have a very keen interest with public health and medical services. I'm very interested in infection prevention and control. I had a little bit of an interest there that was really launched into a different level of interest when COVID-19 became the current pandemic and we identified SARS-CoV-2. Looking at transmission, looking at ways to mitigate that and reduce our risk and exposure to it. And so I have a very strong interest in infection prevention and control. Again, underlying what environmental health sciences is, and that's a little bit of an exposure science. We tend to think it's only chemicals, but it's a whole lot more than that. Any radiological exposures we had, naturally occurring or not, radon gas is a pretty serious exposure risk, especially in the Northeast. But nonetheless, this is an infection exposure that can be done through a fomite or even just bioaerosols. And so also looking at translation science, taking what that evidence is, the science-based evidence, the literature, et cetera, and putting that into practice and informing the public better, creating a more easily digestible and easily repeated kind of concept there in the public, and helping them learn more about what the risks are. And looking at COVID-19 is a perfect example of that. And helping everyone understand the utility of a mask, the function of a mask, the differences in the mask. We probably as a country lost a little bit of traction given the leadership's inability to articulate what an N95 was, what a cloth mask was, why we used one versus the other, what sectors used one versus the other, and just complete conflicting and kind of argumentative statements that were coming from some of the leadership. And so helping smooth that out, I have a very big interest there, obviously with the disaster policy and the practice dovetailing there. I have an interest in mobilized pollutants and contaminants, and we know that those are going to only be exacerbated by disasters, especially storm-based disasters. With the climate changing as we know it to be, we're probably going to have heavier rainfall amounts in certain pockets of the country, for example. We're going to have potentially more frequency in the higher category hurricane storms. There's not a whole lot of evidence that suggests hurricanes in general are increasing, but there's definite evidence that the rapid intensification and the higher major categories of hurricanes, those are category 3, 4, and 5, they're increasing in frequency. And so those are going to potentially give us more rainfall and more flooding events. And so any kind of localized contaminant or pollutant, whether it's at an official site or elsewhere, could get mobilized through those floodwaters. And so I have an interest in that and have a little bit of work and some grants there. Looking at air quality, again, another one of those cornerstones of environmental health, and some of the mixtures of compounds that might lead to an adverse outcome or maybe contribute to it. And looking at breath biopsies and what some of those compounds are when we have our respirations and we go through an oxygen to CO2, very basic exchange, but we know that our breath gives off gases. And what does that composition look like? And what could that tell us? And so there's a little bit of exploratory interest there as well. And so a few of my funding sources and partners and projects here up on the slide. The Region 6 South Central Center, really looking at the Public Health Training Center there. It's gone through a little bit of a different name change way back when, the South Central Public Health Preparedness, and now it's Region 6. And you can see TALON is kind of the acronym that's often used. Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, which you see on your slide, going from west to east a little bit. But nonetheless, Region 6, as it's defined in the US regions, I'm heavily engaged in that as a co-investigator and done a lot of work with public health workforce training, two of which are on your slide there with the Texas Hurricane Response Hub. These were some of the courses that we developed following the 2017 hurricane season, which, if you guys remember, had Hurricane Harvey at first that struck Houston, which is an extremely rapidly intensifying hurricane, led to catastrophic flooding, over 60 inches of rain in the Houston area. So Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and Hurricane Maria, all massive storms in 2017. And so there was a big push from the CDC to help get out some of this funding through the National Network of Public Health Institutes. And so the Texas Health Institute and the Louisiana Public Health Institute partnered with us, and we delivered some of these trainings. And you can see there some of the blending here that I mentioned. I threw these up there because it was a pretty good blend of what I discussed earlier: the emergency management, the response coordination, and the infusion and integration of public health in there. And so that's going to be a continual source of my interest in projects. We have a few grants with the Pontchartrain Conservancy, used to be the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, and the United States Environmental Protection Agency with the Gulf of Mexico region, looking at, again, what I just alluded to with some of the potential flooding and increased rainfall and the mobilization or mobilized pollutants and contamination from one source to the next. Those two grants are really focused on decentralized plumbing and how some of those systems that are decentralized across areas outside of a major urban environment, they're not tied to a centralized sewage treatment facility. And so they have on-site aerated treatment units and septic units that may or may not be functioning properly, and they do fail at a pretty high rate. And we're looking at potential transport of those potential pollutants. Maybe they're there, maybe they're not. But regardless, into areas that are beyond the home site, into recreation space, for example, or whether that's swimming or fishing, for example. And another one with the CDC as well, you see there's a little blurry. Sorry about that. I stretched that picture a little bit too much. But that is the Project First Line that the CDC has announced right in the middle of COVID-19 and continuing on. And we are involved with the National Network of Public Health Institutes to help create more prominent infection prevention and control trainings, looking at how we can improve upon what we know now in COVID-19 and how we can maybe leverage that knowledge into a more holistic view, looking at mitigating any type of infection transmission or addressing it anyway, acknowledging it. So it's blending a lot of different sectors as well. Some of the biggest things that we learned with COVID-19 is looking at some of your building facilities and almost taking an industrial hygiene approach from a work environment into a non-hazardous environment, if you will, in day-to-day working. And so infusing some of those ventilation requirements, some of those higher air change settings, and looking at your filters and looking at even just opening windows to help infuse some fresher air into the environment, because we started to learn more and more and more, and now it's pretty much ingrained, hopefully, the bioaerosol transmission risk there, as opposed to the larger droplets that tend to fall within 6 feet of us and having the surface or the fomite transmission risk. And so that's where we're spending a lot of time as well. But regardless, that's just a few of them there and some of the work we're doing. Looking at some of the degrees that we offer in our program or in our department, primarily here to talk to you guys about my work, and that's where the disaster management focus is. Again, I'm a program director of that. We do offer certificates there, and we love to get our students engaged. It's a requirement of the school for the degree itself. The experiential learning, you can see some of our students here on the slides. A recent graduate, Kelly Hun, up in the top right there, working for the New Orleans Homeland Security Office. She's an amateur photographer in training, as well as her public health expertise. But looking at Mardi Gras and some of the parade traffic and some of the parade breaks and the population movements, and that can help you when we start to look at an infrared scan across Mardi Gras with some of the potential nefarious activity should it happen, or the gas release, for example, pressurized gas release. You might see a difference in the infrared scope there, and having a bird's eye view surveilling that, which obviously Kelly is doing here in the photo, can help you understand where that might be coming from or where the population is going and how to maybe deliver a course correction in the middle of that. And you can see Jake Hurwitz down in the bottom. He's an MD MPH student. He was the planning section chief of the convention center surge model, which we stood up in the city of New Orleans for COVID patients. And so he was a very instrumental piece of what that operation looked like. And it was a recovering center, so to speak. It wasn't those that were in need of mechanical ventilation, the acute injured patient, if you will. It was the ones that were coming off of that mechanical ventilation that maybe still needed a little bit of oxygen, maybe some more continued monitoring, but we could move them to the convention center as opposed to occupying that acute care ICU bed that would allow the incoming patients to occupy that needed that. And that was just our way of doing things in New Orleans. And I say our because it's New Orleans, but that was their way of doing it. As far as others that might have done it differently, there are many ways to offset and decompress hospitals in this case. And so some of our graduates, some of us, myself included, coming into this space way back when, it was kind of, a lot of people didn't know where some of these jobs were and where some of the placement of our graduates may go. I had numerous personal anecdotal conversations with friends and family of, what are you going to study again and where is that going to lead you? Well, here's where it does lead you. Some of our federal positions that our graduates have had, again, I mentioned this before, I think, but the Office of Countering Weapons and Mass Destruction at the Department of Homeland Security in DC, one of our recent graduates down here in the bottom right corner here, Deb Johnny, kind of shaded out the faces here, but nonetheless, Deb is one of the executive officers and the medical director of that office. And so he also was the deputy director of the Homeland Security Office here in New Orleans prior to that. We have folks at the Assistant Secretary of Preparedness and Response, or HHS. We've had folks go there. FEMA hazard mitigation specialists. We have a few actual graduates that are in the Defense Intelligence Agency. A graduate, presidential fellow, communication specialist fellow with the NIH not terribly long ago. We have state and local disaster related leaders, whether that's with a state level or local level emergency management agency or Homeland Security emergency preparedness agency, or even health department or public health office. You can see there, Atlanta, Georgia is led by one of our graduates.
think we may have lost Dr. Murphy. Can anyone hear me? Hey there, everyone. Welcome back. I'm not sure what happened.
Dylan, I got booted off.
Me too. I think we all did. I'm not sure what happened, but feel free. I'm gonna fix those settings so that you can share your screen and pick up where you left off. Sorry about that, everyone.
All right, so I think I just finished when I saw my screen kind of flicker. So some of our graduates have landed at emergency management offices across state level and local level jurisdictions. I think I mentioned Atlanta, Georgia, and this is the individual that's now running Atlanta. He's a graduate of our program. He also once was the director of the